Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to sit back and relax and hear the story of how bogus accusations of racism helped Somali immigrants bilk the state of Minnesota potentially out of billions of dollars. Hey everyone, I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and by now you've probably heard about these massive fraud schemes perpetrated largely but not entirely by Somali immigrants in the state of Minnesota. And you might ask yourself, given the scale of the theft involved, why didn't Minnesota know earlier? Why didn't Minnesota suspect something earlier? Why didn't Minnesota move against it earlier? Well, actually, state officials had suspicions very early on, but were warned off acting on them by accusations of racism. Now, the New York Times has been late to this story, but to its credit, did eventually run an extensive report. And it points out how this started in the pandemic, involved programs for hungry kids, and centered around a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future. Sounds suspiciously anodyne and kind of scammy to me. But anyway, State Department of Education officials who administered the program began to realize, wow, there are a lot of applications for new feeding sites. This doesn't really make sense. Is something wrong here? But then Feeding Our Future fired back. As the Times points out, in an email, the group told the state agency that failing to promptly approve new applicants from, quote, minority-owned businesses, end quote, would result in a lawsuit featuring accusations of racism that would be, quote, sprawled across the news. Now you can just imagine state officials in Minnesota thinking, we're not racist. Please don't accuse us of racism. If we have the moral choice between getting accused of racism and letting massive fraud be perpetrated against the taxpayers of Minnesota, we'll choose the latter every single time. And indeed, a report from the so-called Office of Legislative Auditor found that these sort of threats had an effect. That report notes that Feeding Our Future began threatening to sue MDE, that's the Department of Education, in April 2020, and in November 2020, it filed a lawsuit against the department. The Department of Education officials said the department had to be particularly clear and intentional in its oversight of Feeding Our Future in light of its legal risks. Further, when MDE and Feeding Our Future were engaged in a lawsuit, court filings included accusations by Feeding Our Future that MDE was discriminating against it because it served minority communities. Finally, according to MDE officials, the threat of legal consequences and negative media attention affected MDE's decisions about the regulatory actions it did and did not take against Feeding Our Future. In short, they were intimidated. They blinked. This is a classic case of what the late, great Tom Wolfe called mau-mauing the flat catcher, intimidating city officials to do what you want or look the other way. And then there's old-fashioned bribery.
Maybe this will refresh your memory.
I don't know, it's still kind of hazy.
How about this?
Yeah, I remember him. I used to see him around. Why do you want to know?
I can't tell you that.
Well, maybe this'll help.
I really don't think I should.
Yeah, you still don't think so?
All right, his name is Nordberg.
Except it was bribery with a politically correct twist. When the fraud case involving the food programs got going, there was an attempt by the defendants to bribe a juror. As the New York Times points out, several defendants in the trial were found to have arranged to send a bag containing $120,000 to a juror along with a note that read, why? Is it always people of color and immigrants prosecuted for the fault of other people? So subtle. So heartrending, right? By the way, the lead prosecutor in these cases, a guy named Joseph Thompson, who's been a real hero, has pointed out the deterrent effect that charges of racism had. He said that he believed that race sensitivities had played a major role in the rise of fraud. This was a huge part of the problem, quote, Mr. Thompson said, quote, allegations of racism can be a reputation or career killer. Of course, race has nothing to do with it. You're either guilty of fraud or you're not. And if you're stealing from the state and its taxpayers, doesn't matter whether you're white or black, you are a criminal. And dozens of Somali immigrants were criminals and took advantage of the good faith, the naivete, and the woke sensibilities of Minnesota officials to bilk them out of billions of dollars. Maybe next time these officials won't be stupid, but this is the state that has elected as its governor Tim Walz multiple times, so unfortunately they probably will be just as moronic next time. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.